What I find the hardest is how humiliated I was, that I felt embarrassed that I was the one who was being bullied. I do understand that, of course, that I was being bullied and the things that were being said were awful and stuff like that there, but I was so embarrassed that it was me. I was being bullied, So then that on top of trying to tell somebody, I had to go through that embarrassment again, trying to tell an adult.
Hello and welcome back to the Mothership, the show that brings the issues that matter most to Irish families to the table. I'm Laura Cunningham, and on this week's episode we're going to talk about bullying. What do we as parents do if our child is being picked on or harassed? Joining us this week we have Aileen Hickey from Parent.ie. Thank you for doing this. YouTuber Amy O'Neill and journalist Jen Hogan. Guys, thanks so much for being with us this week. I think this is going to be a bit of a difficult watch for a lot of our viewers because obviously, being bullied or having your precious baby go through something like that is a really difficult subject. And we hear a lot from readers, about, they're going through this, their kids are being picked on at school and, what do they do? What are the practicalities, but also how to deal with, the difficulties of the upset that it causes and all of that kind of thing. So we're hopefully going to break it down today and maybe offer a bit of support and encouragement to those guys. So Amy, I want to come to you first. So you've been really, generous with your story. You've spoken publicly about your experience of bullying in school. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that's affected you throughout school?
So I was bullied, basically primary school and the secondary school. Secondary school was definitely worse. But I don't know, what I find the hardest is how humiliated I was, that I felt embarrassed that I was the one who was being bullied. I do understand that, of course, that I was being bullied and the things that were being said were awful and stuff like that there, but I was so embarrassed that it was me. I was being bullied, So then that on top of trying to tell somebody, I had to go through that embarrassment again, trying to tell an adult.
It's tough. And so did you approach your school about it?
Yeah, so I told my mummy and my daddy first, and then I went on, they helped and they told the school. I went to my head of year, form teacher and stuff like that there. It was greatly sorted, but still.
And so briefly, what kind of bullying? Was this physical or was it emotional? What did you...
So I experienced emotional bullying. It was definitely a mental abuse and just some things that some people might not even have thought to be bullying, but to me, I was I just constantly felt on edge, didn't know where to turn, and the things that were just wee jokes just weren't to me.
They're never really jokes, were they? So that sort of subtle bullying comments from multiple people, or was it one person in particular? So
there was a couple friend groups. So maybe one or two people from the friend group, but then there was 2 or 3 friend groups all doing it. But it was always, there was a group of ones, and even though it was only 1 or 2 people from each group saying something, they were all involved at the same time.
Of course they were. You're complicit if you're not saying something.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And it's interesting that you should say some people might not have thought of some of the things that you're saying as being bullying, because we have these interesting statistics. So we, a nationwide survey was done, and this is kind of the only really official statistic, and it says that 31% of primary school kids and 16% of secondary school kids have been bullied at some times. But you would wonder, Aileen, what do you think, though, if there are those statistics skewed by the fact that people don't maybe always talk about it? In Parent Line, you obviously hear from a lot of parents about this stuff.
We do. And first of all, I'd say, the statistics are only what's being reported. So obviously a lot of children who are bullied aren't reporting the bullying. Even as you said there, Amy, it was difficult for you to report the bullying. So that's what happens. And actually, it can be quite difficult for a child who's being bullied to even name it, because, to even identify, are they being bullied or not? Because the bullying crosses a huge gamut of in terms of areas. Bullying can be extortion, it can be exclusion, it can be verbal abuse, physical abuse, name calling, right through to to actually physical bullying and to assault. So there's a huge spectrum in terms of the range of bullying. And what people need to remember is that anybody can be bullied, because a bully will find a reason to bully you for anything. So it can be down to sexual identification or gender gender identity. It can be down to race, religion. It can be down to the fact that you might play a particular sport, that you look different. It can be down to a disability. people can bully you for absolutely anything. What we would hear in Parentline is parents who are extremely distressed because their child is being bullied. And a lot of the time they feel entirely powerless to do anything about it, because I think a lot of the time they feel that, that if the child is being bullied in school, they don't know where to turn, that they're maybe being pushed from Billy to Jack in terms of the school system, that they report it to the class teacher, who maybe refers it back to the form head, who refers it to the principal, and then back around again on the carousel. Mm-hmm. So what there needs to be in schools is a strong referral pathway and a strong reporting pathway. So and that's actually not just for the student and not just for the parent, that's also for the teacher, so that the teacher knows exactly how to deal with bullying that's taking place in the school. Now, obviously, not all bullying takes place within the school, but I think the other thing is, for parents, they're extremely distressed that their child is being bullied, because it's not just the short-term consequences, and they are there, and that can be in terms of self-esteem and everything else, but also the longer-term consequences and the long-term impact on somebody's mental health, because they have been bullied. Yeah. And it can end up often that the victim of the bullying is the one who ends up leaving the school or refusing to go to school. We would get about 20% of the calls into Parentline every year are to do with school refusal. Now, there's many reasons for school refusing, and there can be very good, valid medical reasons, but for a child being bullied is one of the huge reasons why a child will refuse to go to school.
This is the child refusing to go to school.
This is a child refusing to go to school. And, that's particularly impactful, obviously, in the secondary school system. So, every child has a right to an education, but they also have a right to an education in a happy and safe environment where they're happy to go every day.
Yeah. I can't
help but feel no negative.
If you're going through a negative, horrible thing like bullying, but you also feel like the system isn't supporting you in that, that's nearly trauma on top of a trauma. Like you're just left
it's
a bit.
More work.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, I know you have very strong feelings about how this is dealt with in a school setting.
Yeah, I mean, I would have parents contact me a lot about this. I've written about this in the past as well. And inevitably, every time I go near this topic, I'm inundated with replies from parents who are, as Aileen said, absolutely devastated this is happening, feel completely powerless. And it's always the same situation. They feel that they're not getting places with the school. So obviously there's anti-bullying policies in place, and they'll go and they'll try to figure out the correct avenue to go down and the correct route to take. But all the while, the child is often still enduring the same bullying, still dealing with the humiliation, the harassment. And it's so different these days. It's so different because it's not a case of going home and closing your door and you've escaped. It's online too. Yeah. But I think what ends up happening is that a lot of parents report to me, they feel like it's box ticking. They feel they go through the anti-bullying policies, and even with the best will in the world, it ultimately ends up becoming box ticking, and it doesn't, the problem isn't solved. The child either loses out on their education altogether by staying home, refusing to go to school. Perhaps the school refuser thing is kind of a difficult one, because it nearly puts blame back on the child, but there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it, to protect their health, to protect their well-being. And you can just imagine the anxiety of it. That, or else the child ends up moving on to a different school, and it's them who has to deal with ultimately the huge change. And parents have reported to me that they feel like it kind of suits their school in certain situations. It has suited the school because that's the problem solved for now. They may still have an issue with bullying, but it's a couple more years they've got to put in, and it's solved for now, and the child moves on. But that the child who moves to another school still is dealing with the trauma left over, and that feeling, if I run into trouble again, no, I'm in the same potential situation. I'm not going to be supported.
That it's the responsibility of changing things is on the victim as such. And also, if you've gone through, the bullying, and then you've gone through the not feing supported by your school, and you then have to go in and somehow muster up the bravery to be the new kid in the new school, like that's a real shame. Did you miss a lot of school over things like this?
I wasn't as much. My mum very much was on the ball straight into the school as soon as she was made aware of it. But I was missing classes to go to meetings with teachers, with the principal, stuff like that there. Yeah.
And would other kids have been aware of what was happening to you?
Yeah. Okay. So most people did know that this was happening. Yeah.
I do think that's something that we really need to change. And certainly from speaking again to parents, they'll often talk about how isolated their child is and the difference it would make if you had somebody standing up to them. Maybe perhaps when we're dealing with bullying in schools, as well as obviously having the anti-bullying policies in place and having these conversations, it needs, I believe anyway, to be a weekly conversation, encouraging children to actually stand up, to be an upstander rather than a bystander, matter, making that difference, being that one person who speaks up for what's right, calls it out. You know, we're seeing it with women in particular, you know, and we're asking men to call out sex, and we need to take it back to the classroom too, and have children call out bullying. And to do that, really, then we're going to need to celebrate this, and celebrate kindness, and celebrate inclusion, and celebrate all these different things, because there's so much focus on academics and sporting achievement and all those things in school, but we really need children and students to feel empowered to stand up, to know this is something that will be appreciated by their peers, appreciated by their schools, and just to do the decent thing. The amount of support a bullied child might feel from somebody calling it out, knowing that they have an ally, that they're not alone, because it's just too easy to sit back and say nothing. It's not good enough to not bully. We need to be anti-bullying. We need to be active in changing things.
And I'm sure it's scary enough to kind of stand up because you feel like you might put yourself in the fire line, but that's a wonderful lesson. In the same way that we're trying to, you know, encourage men to stand up to, you know, sexism, and to encourage everybody to call out racism. And it needs to be, you need to be an anti-bully.
The Department of Education actually, you know, are very strong in this, and they're trying to be stronger. So, you know, there is a very good anti-bullying action plan there. Now, it is in place since 2013, which obviously is 9 years ago. But I know that they are revising it and reviewing it and strengthening it. I think because they're very conscious of having very good anti-bullying policies in school. The problem about having an anti-bullying policy in school is that you don't want having a policy like anything else unless it's actually put into practice. And it can only be put into practice if the teachers are trained and they know how to recognize the bullying, how to deal with the bullying, and how to give parents the reassurance that they are dealing with the bullying, and the students reassurance that they are dealing with the bullying. And again, like everything else, it's all about early intervention. And, you know, and you mentioned that there, Amy, that, you know, your mom was on top of it, you know, as quickly as possible. So it is about early intervention and about, you know, just trying to stop that negative behavior as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to go over a couple of, we straw polled our readers before the show, as we often do. And I mean, you know, this is very anecdotal, but say about 56% of them said that their child had experienced bullying, and that would be across primary and secondary. Most of them approached the school. Very few of them approached the parents involved directly. But, you know, I suppose the results are really that it was a very mixed response from the school. Some people were absolutely thrilled with the response the school had, and they sorted it out straight away, and some people just felt like it was a box ticking exercise and that it wasn't really dealt with properly. It seems to be really teacher dependent, I think, is the thing, isn't it?
It is. And you see, teachers essentially, class teachers particularly, should be the gatekeepers in relation to bullying, in that it goes to them, and they should have, you know, a strong reporting pathway or a strong step-by-step process of how they deal with it. Because again, as I say, that will give the reassurance to the parent that it is actually being dealt with. But it also gives the teacher the confidence to deal with it. Because I think a lot of teachers maybe don't feel they have the confidence to deal with the bullying issue. They don't actually know what to do, which is why they refer upwards to the form teacher and then on to the principal. And as I say, and you know, sometimes that comes back around again. So the teacher needs to be the gatekeeper, and there needs to be a strong referral pathway. And at the end of the day, it is all about the school environment, and the school environment has to be a happy and safe place as well as an educational environment.
I mean, is there things that they can be doing it from a proactive perspective, you know, not just responding to complaints that they hear, whether it's workshopping in class, role playing, that kind of thing? I feel like that would be a really big step. Would you think that would have helped?
Yeah, I think definitely. Whenever I think about it, I think people don't really understand the full consequences. Like I know you can say it and you're like, oh well, that'll be detrimental to that person, but it's just the words at the end of the day. Because
Amy's right. I mean, you know, there's the short term. It can have devastating long-term consequences. It can have tragic, potentially tragic long-term consequences. And, you know, that needs to be borne in mind. I mean, this is something that can affect long-term mental health right through adulthood, you know, and you know, so it just needs to be dealt with.
It impacts, I think, families at home as well. You know, not just the student going through, which is horrific enough, but you've got parents, siblings, other members of the family constantly worried, constantly fretting, thinking, how is she in school today? How is he in school today? Is everything going okay? That constant fear that, I suppose, even if it's one child within a family, the amount of attention that needs to go in terms of protecting that child is obviously attention taken away from other It has huge impacts, but it is lifelong. I mean, you're talking, I've spoken to adults recently who spoke about their experience of being bullied as children. It has never left them. It has impacted the road they've taken. It impacts their confidence. One man mentioned to me, like, if he hears somebody laughing, he still presumes it's him they're laughing at.
Okay.
Like, and he's a grown man now. It just leaves such a huge mark. I don't think we can, emphasize enough how devastating and damaging it is, and how important it is that we try to get on top of it.
And speaking of families, what is the role of the accused, of their family, of their parents? Should they be approached? Is that happening at schools?
I don't know.
I think it probably does happen, but maybe not in every circumstance. And just because they're approached doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of it. No. Neither does the family of the child who's being bullied necessarily know that the family of the bullier has been approached. There's a lot of issues there with GDPR and all the rest of it. So again, that's not straightforward. So, I suppose essentially the school hopes to deal with it, with the child and with the family of the child, but that doesn't necessarily give reassurance to the parent that it has been dealt with. And sometimes children are suspended and people don't know why they've been suspended. It may be because they've bullied a particular child, but that child may not know that, why they've been, that family had been suspended because of that or that child.
So that seems like a structural issue within schools about how this is being dealt with. And I know you're involved with a committee who are trying to look at how we can kind of bring change with this specific. So, I mean, what is on the horizon? What's the plan? Like, what needs to change, I suppose?
Well, I think what needs to change is just currently what's in place in schools. The policies are there. They just need to be revised, updated. They need to be strengthened. They need to be put into practice. Yeah. There are calls for things like, maybe like an anti-bullying coordinator within schools, who could, actually just take the responsibility and take it on board, make sure that pathways are followed and that the reporting process is followed directly to the end. I certainly think there is a strong call for emotional counselling in the school, and for a specific emotional counsellor. It's fine to have a guidance counsellor, and guidance counsellors are great, but a lot of schools, particularly large secondary schools, certainly need an on-staff professional emotional counsellor.
It seems crazy that that's not a thing, really.
It absolutely does. Absolutely does. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people will talk about, that one teacher who really had their back in school or whatever. But if you don't get lucky in that respect, then what happens? That should be a resource that's available.
Absolutely,
to all
because a lot of parents end up literally feeling powerless and lost because they, if the school isn't responding in the way they wish them to, they don't actually know where to turn. They don't, particularly, in secondary level, they just feel totally lost, which is why, as I say, children end up then school refusing, or parents end up pulling that child who's the victim of the bullying from the school, putting them in another school. So the bully is left to remain in the school. But is the victim of the bullying that's moved on.
There's a new school or misses out on their education altogether in some cases where you can't get maybe a child to go back to school because they're just so fearful of it happening again. It's like the double punishment for the victim. So what we're doing isn't working. What we're doing isn't working, so we need more.
That seems like the first steps that should absolutely be implemented. And I mean, that person would act as an ally to the parent at home as well. Like you say, if you're sitting at home fretting about your child who's maybe experiencing this, I presume you feel like that would have really helped.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Just having someone that you guaranteed to go to, and if there was like constant communication with your parents as well, it would take
so somebody who can coordinate the process, who takes the full responsibility for it, so as the parent, and specifically as the student or the child, that something is being done here, that this is, somebody has taken ownership of this and they've named it.
I mean, never to put the onus on the victim of this thing, but do you guys think there's any way we can kind of, in some way, bully-proof our kids? Like, what are the steps that we can take? Because I know a lot of parents are looking at sending their kids into secondary school. Maybe they haven't been in school properly in the last couple of years.
You can't bully your kids because, that's the thing. Anybody can be bullied, for anything. And it literally can be down to the fact that they might look a small bit different. It literally can be down to a boy who doesn't play rugby. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be down to absolutely anything, so,
And it's rarely to do with them, really, is it?
Oh, yeah, no, it's all to do with the bully and their issue with whatever they have found in you that they dislike, or that they can, something that they feel that
in some way upsets them.
Yeah.
But I would think, though, is very much, I think it's really important to look to make sure the school suits the child. And I think different schools have different ethoses, and some schools are very academic, some schools are very sporting, some schools just have a reputation for being particularly inclusive. And I think you need to look at the nature of your child versus the school you're sending them to. And I think it's really important that we don't get caught up in school league tables and let that be your driver instead of the school that actually suits the child. One thing I've learned as a parent that I never thought would be the case, but having watched my children go to school, some of them who went to school, knowing secondary schools in particular where they go and they didn't know somebody, and I thought it'd be grand, they'll make new friends, versus some of them going with a tribe. Having a tribe is huge. I never thought it might matter quite as much. I thought that the kids are, they just make friends, but it just having somebody there, having someone that you have someone to have lunch with, you have somebody to navigate the school halls with and find your way, particularly at the beginning when you're finding your feet. That it's huge. And I certainly know with my kids when they're going to school, I am curious to find out, will they have a pal going to a school? Will they have somebody that they know? Will they have building kind of those relationships sometimes before they even started? There are things we can kind of do as parents to help little, not really manipulate.
Can you orchestrate a little pals?
Go, let's hey guys, why don't you go to the cinema? Why don't we go to the cinema? I'll take a couple of your pals to the cinema, or have them over for a movie night and a pizza. There are a couple of things that you can do to try and not quite, you can't force friendships, but to cement friendships a tiny bit and just give them that knowing before they go in that they're not alone. And even this, I don't even mean a child who's perhaps had a difficult time in primary school. I mean just any child going into secondary school, knowing somebody. And the same, you can do it from a very young age. So thankfully, very small children tend to be much kinder. You don't tend to see this in junior and senior infants. Most kids are incredibly accepting and inclusive, and they're very happy to play with anybody. But particularly for that transition to secondary school, I think there are a couple of things that we can do. We can help our kids. We can help them make friends, and we can take an active role in choosing a school that suits our children as opposed to the ones that
can I follow up on that point, Jen? I think also it's important to remember that to choose a school that suits your child, but also you have to, I think maybe some families feel that all siblings should go to the same school.
Absolutely.
Not all schools fit for, so it's okay to send your children to different secondary schools or even to different primary schools, because it may not suit, maybe because they're a mixed school or a single-sex school, or they may have more of a sporting ethos or more of an, arts and crafts or, whatever it is. But, just because your other three children went to that secondary school doesn't necessarily mean that the fourth one goes to that secondary school. You need to bear that in mind. And also the other thing is, you said there about, it's great if they go to secondary school with their tribe that they know from either the neighbourhood or from primary school. They may lose their tribe very quickly. And I think every parent needs to remember that. Yes. And they often will lose their tribe very quickly. So you just have to wait until to see if they find a new tribe or meet new friends. You don't necessarily bring the friends that you were, played with when you were 3 right through into your teenage years. No. And you can't force that either. So, you just have to kind of let them. Look, my favourite expression is water meets its own level. And that's what you have to remember. They will, in time, find their own tribe and their own new tribe. It's just you have to let them at it.
Okay. It's scary, isn't it, though, for parents? It really is. I think
we think we're more powerless than we are, though. I do think, particularly in that younger teen, I think there's a real opportunity there. It sounds terrible now, I'm going to say, but you can manipulate and exploit some of their innocence nearly in terms of, arranging those pizza evenings or those movie situations. I think you can, if you can see that maybe your child has lost their tribe or isn't finding a tribe, it is possible. I think parent relationships are really important, and they're very hard in secondary school, because that's when your kid backs out and you're not necessarily part of their arrangements to go places you were in secondary school, in primary school. But I think a lot of mums and dads would appreciate if you reach out to them. You say perhaps your daughter or son is finding things a little bit difficult, you want to try and get them together. I think most parents are supportive of that. It doesn't even, I'm not even talking going to the stage of bullying, but to the stage of helping them. get settled in and perhaps protecting them a little bit from bullying thereby, because they have that tribe. And even if you can't stop them from bullying, you can make them, you know, feel that they have a value and they have a worth, that they're matter to their friends. Because sometimes with bullying, the child can become totally isolated, totally removed, and feel totally excluded from everything. So there are things I do think we can help a little bit. We can help by organising. And, you know, you won't be thanked by a teenager for being mammy sat down and organised this. So you have to be uber discreet in how you do this. So
but on that, you know, we talk about approaching the school. We talk about potentially or not approaching the parents of the accused, you know, but is it a good idea then to reach out to the other parents in the class and say, look, you know, Mary is having a hard time, and maybe encourage them to teach their kids to be an ally for Mary, you know?
I think
you need to be very careful on that.
You have to know the parent very well. I agree.
Yeah, you have to be very careful there. You know, and again, you don't want to get into a position where, you know, you're pinpointing, you know, a particular individual or a particular group of kids. So I think you have to be very, again, as Jen said there, unless you know the parent very well, it wouldn't be going down that route, you know. It is, I think, essentially, if your child is being bullied in school, it is better to let the school deal with it, because that's really where it needs to be dealt with. I mean, because it's all about, again, making the school the happy and safe environment. You know, there's only so far you can push it. So the parent should get the reassurance from the school. I mean, it's a mixture of the parent working with the teacher, working with the child, and back again.
You also don't know how somebody's going to react to it. And with this is your baby. And if it's your baby, even if it's your baby who's doing the bullying, you know, the biggest advocate for a bully is going to be their parents. It absolutely is going to be their parents. And it's very hard to be told that your child is a bully. So you won't necessarily get the response that you're looking for, you know.
But in terms of reaching out, say, to other parents in the class who aren't involved in this situation, you know,
it's politics, isn't it? Do you know the politics?
Are you trying to gang up?
And do you know the politics well enough? Do you know perhaps of different friendships that might exist? Or might you be seen as someone who's trying to isolate someone else, even if it's done
a really good point.
completely innocently and with the best will in the world? I would agree with Aileen. I think the school, no matter how tempting it is, unless you have a particularly strong relationship, and even that can be compromised when children are involved, I think we are so protective of our own children that we will not take kindly to anybody questioning anything. Reaching out to help them, if you know, or to organise that, you can. I think you can, but you'd have to be very careful, perhaps, in not explaining why. I wouldn't go into detail, say Johnny's being bullied by Mary or something. I wouldn't go down that road. But perhaps you could say, look, she's having a difficult time. He's having a difficult time, and reach out to someone that you maybe know and try again. Form those. Not quite manipulate.
You can't force the friendships either, and neither can you be seen to be the parent that's trying to force your child into a gang that are not going to accept your child, because you know that's only making the situation worse,
completely worse. So it's such a delicate balance.
It is, isn't it?
It's trying to do
because again, you know, as a parent,
much.
what you're supposed to be doing in secondary school is essentially pulling back, you know, a little bit from your child, so that you're going to give them a bit of independence going forward. So you're trying to balance giving them that independence while watching over them at the same time. But you know, it's a very it's a very narrow tightrope that you're walking on there.
You can facilitate things perhaps more than you certainly can't force. You cannot force, and you wouldn't necessarily want to force. If somebody really doesn't want to be friends with your child, you do not. It's not
it's not going to work anyway.
It's not. You move on.
Yeah, you move on. But there is you'll often find, I think it's funny, and we have these conversations more particularly in primary school, where you'll have parents, if they're meeting for coffee or they're even passing time at the school gate, where they might mention that their little one is not mixing as well as they might like to. But again, your teacher can help here. The teacher will often observe certain friendships, or perhaps identify somebody who might be more open to facilitating something like a movie night or facilitating a trip. But as Aileen said, you're at that stage where you're supposed to be pulling back, not pushing in. So you can only go so far and do so much.
And of course, you know, all like kids' social lives have been a bit skewed over the last couple of years with everything that's going on. So it's not easy. And there's no solution to this. You know, unfortunately, we weren't going to sit down today and find the answer to bullying, but I think, you know, unfortunately that's all we have time for. But the message really is communication, isn't it, with your kid, with the school or the hobby group or whatever it is.
And also the message is to try and make sure that your child, you know, is welcoming and accepts differences. Because you know that's what it's all about. Because essentially, bullying, I suppose, it relates to a child finding a difference between themselves and the child that they're bullying. So children need to accept differences and be welcoming.
So as parents, we need to basically hopefully instill that in our own kids.
Yeah.
So that,
Repeatedly, because as they change, they're going to meet more other people who are different in different ways, and repeatedly, and so they know as teenagers that lesson is as important as it is in junior and senior infants, when they tend to learn it then anyway, and when they tend to naturally be more inclusive.
And lead from the front also, you know, that's the other thing. You have to lead from the front. So if they see you, you know, if you're going to be speaking negatively about somebody, you know, that they're not going to lick it off the stones. So, you know, that's you know, so just remember what you do in your own friendships as an adult may affect what they do in their friendships as a child.
And we hear amazing things from some parents as well about teachers who are brilliant at this and who basically teach it in class like it is another subject. So more of that, please.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, girls, thank you so much. That was brilliant, and I hope it's given a bit of support and encouragement to parents who might be going through it at the moment. But we'll have to leave it there. As always, we'll leave all the information about everything we spoke about underneath the video. Until next week, we will see you then.